Atlus has become one of the most celebrated RPG developers in modern gaming, and today we take a look at their latest release, SoulHackers 2, to see if it can continue to power the Atlus hype train, or if we may have gone a little off the rails. I'm Pyrus for Pyrus Gaming, and welcome to my channel. To start things off, the way I handle my reviews is by providing a little insight into the game, how it caught my attention, initial thoughts from the early stages, and then I'll break everything down into 5 categories, rating the game on a scale of 1 to 5, old school Game Pro style. Then I'll wrap things up with an overall score and a recommendation whether to go out and buy it, wait for a sale, wait to stream or demo the game, or if you should just hold off for something better. Obviously, this review is my opinion, and I welcome discussion in the comments below, either on the game or any ways for me to improve my videos. To start things off, I've become an Atlus fan in short order. It started with Persona 5 and carried into Catherine Full Body, and last year's excellent title for the Switch, Shin Megami Tensei 5. When I saw the initial trailer for SoulHackers 2, I honestly wasn't quite sure what was happening, but I was excited for a new Atlus JRPG on the current gen consoles. The most disappointing part for me of SMT5 was the low frame rate and resolution due to the limitations of the Switch. So with SoulHackers 2 coming to PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, and PC, I was ready for that 4K 60 Atlus experience. SoulHackers 2 shares many elements with Persona and SMT, from the demons to the abilities and elements to the overall themes of good and evil, order and chaos. Where it differs the most is in the tone of the game and the art style. While there are still similarities in style to Persona and SMT, there is a clear, futuristic, bright neon aesthetic to SoulHackers 2, and to go along with it, the protagonist Ringo is quirky and sarcastic, funny, and frequently reacts the same as the player. I found several times where my reaction to a scene was mimicked by Ringo, whether it was surprise or disbelief at the actions or statements of another character. I was frequently thinking the same exact thing that Ringo ended up saying in the game. This seems very intentional, as Ringo is a synthetic being that has been created by Ion. She is basically a child of the internet. So she doesn't act or speak like an android, she's much closer to a current day teenager, but with all the knowledge of the internet and the processing power of a supercomputer. It was a creative way for Atlus to make their main character seem human and a sympathetic figure, despite the fact that she's created in the first scene of the game and is clearly not.
Sheesh, you're stubborn. I've never met anyone so unnecessarily complex or annoying or just plain stupid.
You hear that?
That goes for you, too.
That brings us to the story of SoulHackers 2. As with most SMT and Persona games, there's a struggle between multiple factions, and our role is to step in to stop a potential apocalypse. In the opening scenes, Ringo and Fig are created from Ion, and Ion is a sort of abstract entity with all the power and knowledge of the internet. Ion is watching over mankind to protect it from itself while attempting to understand mankind. In this case, Ringo and Fig must stop the Covenant from falling into the hands of the Iron Mask. The Covenant is a sort of mystical force which has been split up into multiple parts and is housed inside human beings for safekeeping. Ringo and Fig are charged with finding these holders of the Covenant and protecting them to prevent Iron Mask from bringing about the end of the world. As Ringo and Fig are searching for the Covenant holders, they find that they are too late to save some. But Ringo has the power of soul hacking, which allows her to enter the soul of a slain individual shortly after they've been killed, to intervene and offer the person a second chance at life. This also creates a link between Ringo and the individual, which is manifested in a virtual world called the Axis. Your party is made up of Ringo, Arrow, who's an agent of Yatagarasu, Milady, who's an agent of the Phantom Society, and Saizo, a freelance devil summoner. Each member of the party has their own motivations and checkered histories. Ultimately, I found them to be very likable, especially Saizo, who may not be the most pure of heart, but his dark sense of humor and easy to understand motivation make him clearly the frontrunner for fan favorite. Overall, the story of SoulHackers 2 has a good amount of depth and character development, and in true Atlus style, there are several twists and turns to the story. The only complaints potentially would be about the overall story pacing, which can seem to slog along from time to time, and the fact that the main party members are acquired early on and limit the dynamics. There's some good interactions between characters. They do have conflicting interests throughout the story, and while there may be some small plot holes, it was an overall enjoyable experience. They even tend to make comments in the middle of battle based off of actions that their allies are taking, including if they're healed by someone they're not expecting. These little touches were a nice way to integrate the dynamics between the characters into the battles. All things considered, I'd have to give story and narrative 4.0. Next up is music and sound design, and I have to say that I really did enjoy the music of SoulHackers 2. Atlus has done a great job with the soundtracks to these games, especially when it comes to the battle music, and this game is no exception. The tracks sound great, they fit in with the action on screen, and are memorable, especially the opening theme that plays when you're idling in the title screen. Likewise, the voice acting of the characters and the overall sounds of the game are very strong. There were very few cringy or out of place moments through the playthrough, and the English dubs were not distracting at all. Especially in a game like this, which is so dialogue heavy, it's really important that the voice actors nail their characters, and in my opinion, they've done so here. My only gripes for sound is that I wish there were more tracks with more variety, but that's kind of minor. So for SoulHackers 2, I will give it a 4.5 for music and sound design. Moving on to gameplay and controls, SoulHackers 2 has a lot of what you'd expect from an Atlus game. It uses a turn-based battle system that's basically a simplified version of what you get from SMT or Persona. Instead of using the press turn system, whereby if you hit a demon's weakness you add on to the turn, hitting a weakness will net you a +1 to your stack. At the end of your turn, the number of stacks that you've gained through hitting weaknesses decide how much your final ability will do, which is known as the Sabbath. Each time you hit a weakness, the shadow of one of your demons will appear beside your enemy. There are also other abilities called commander abilities, which can change the course of battle either through allowing you to change out demons, boost up your defense, increase the number of stacks gained from hitting a weakness, or concentrating your Sabbath. And the Sabbath is similar to an all-out attack from Persona 5 in that it hits all enemies through all resistances, so it's basically guaranteed damage at the end of your turn, just as long as you have at least one stack. Over the course of the game, you'll also find demons who gain Sabbath abilities, which can activate during a Sabbath. Those can have effects such as additional damage, healing your team based off damage from the Sabbath, buffing your allies, or debuffing your enemies. These also typically have individual animations, which add a nice touch to the battle. There are pluses and minuses to these changes. On the plus side, this makes battle much more forgiving, especially for newer players to the series. Shin Megami Tensei 5 in particular, some of the difficulty came from losing turns when you'd miss an enemy, or if you chose the wrong element to attack them with. And in that game, the enemy could also build up their turns by hitting weaknesses against you. This meant that it was very common for a new enemy that had ability to hit your weaknesses to wipe you out in a single turn. Similarly, in SoulHackers, if you are ambushed by an enemy, you will only be attacked by 1 or 2 enemies, whereas in the other games, it can let an entire group of enemies attack before you get the chance to act. So as I said, for new players to this series, this is probably a good thing, as it makes the game much more accessible. The negative is that it really limits the battle and seems to much more like a straightforward turn-based system, which could take away some of the excitement of battle for some, especially if you're expecting that press turn excitement. In SoulHackers 2, when an enemy hits your weakness, it just does additional damage. It doesn't add to their turn, it doesn't build up to a Sabbath on their end, so it is not nearly as punishing as in the other games. As I said, for a new player to this series is probably a good thing, and it makes the game more accessible. The negative is that it really limits the battle, and it seems much more like a straightforward turn-based system than the other Mega 10 games. The commander abilities do give a little bit of extra flexibility, and you'll need to use them especially as you get closer to the end of the game. But it definitely limits the strategy, and some battles tend to just carry on because you're not able to put out as much damage as in the press turn system. The other elements of the battles that really bothered me were that there were several battles against boss characters where if you're underleveled or didn't have access to spells that hit the weakness of the boss, and the battle is just taking too long, the boss just decides to use an almighty attack that kills your entire squad. I'm not really sure why Atlus decided to put this in the game, but it happened several times to me with several different bosses, and it's infuriating every time. The only thing I could think of is that maybe they just wanted to make sure you couldn't cheese the game by having resistances to all the boss's attacks and then slowly whittle them down. But it seemed like it was just more like a set number of turns that you'd have before the boss would just say, that's enough of this, and then use this almighty ability that you can't have resistances against and end the fight. Luckily, it didn't happen all that often, but when it did, especially if it was in a fight that had taken quite a while, it was very frustrating. Other than the controls in combat, the movement around the map is fine. The controls work fine. The slashing movement that Ringo uses to initiate the battle is a little slow and clunky, and it's easy to find yourself missing the enemy short, or in some cases swinging around the silhouette of the enemy, leading you to being ambushed rather than initiating the fight. There are some other quirky decisions, such as markers on the map in the overworld areas or shopping areas that you can walk to open the map to travel somewhere else, but you can also just press the options button, which brings up the menu to travel to those areas anyway, so it seems a little unnecessary. Overall, controls work fine. The battle system also works fine. I would say it's a step back from the other Atlus titles, although like I said, it is an advantage for new players who aren't up to speed on that system because it will make for a more straightforward and easier experience. So for controls and gameplay, I give SoulHackers 2 a 3.5. On to the graphics, and it's clear to see that the look and style of SoulHackers 2 is very different to the other Atlus games. There are some similarities, but this is definitely its own game, and it plays on the futuristic digital world that Ringo and Fig come from. All of the locations in the overworld are brightly lit up in neon and have a modern aesthetic. The character models, the animated portraits, the menus, the demons, and the battle animations are all clean, crisp, and pop off the screen. The biggest negative, and this has come across in many other reviews, is in the dungeons and the axis. And while there are one or two exceptions, the majority of the dungeons are empty, bland, and have very minimal detail to them. Frequently, you'll find yourself wandering into a certain area of the map and find that it's an empty room with absolutely nothing in it. Later on, you might find a side quest that brings you back to that room, but it doesn't change the experience of wandering from one end of the map to the other just to fill it out and figure out what was in there, and in the end the answer was nothing. Atlus does try to mix things up with some of the mechanisms for moving around the maps, namely the use of elevators or teleporters, but for the most part what ends up happening is you just try to look into every corner of the map to fill it out and find either the item you need to unlock a door or a character hidden in a corner that will progress the story. This really hurts the overall experience of progressing through SoulHackers 2. If the dungeons had been fleshed out more fully, with at least a little more effort paid to making them feel different from one another, or better yet, making one hallway or one room feel different than the last, it would have greatly improved the player's experience. But as it is, I have to give graphics 3.5 almost entirely due to the poor dungeons. The overall aesthetic, the look, the graphics, the colors, the tone, everything else I really enjoyed, honestly. It's just those dang dungeons. You have to spend so much time doing it. Even the axis where you're looking to further the individual stories with your teammates is a lot of the same. It's not the same as the dungeons. They're sort of their own two things, but you've seen one floor of the axis, you've seen pretty much all of them. It just adds in some different teleporters and a couple different mechanics. The other thing that they did with the dungeons and the axis is that when you first enter them, Ringo will send out the demons in your party. And what those demons do is they go and scatter around the level for you to find. When you find them, they'll have an icon above their head that's either a normal item or a special item, potentially a quest item. They could also be how you recruit demons. What'll happen is you'll walk up to the demon, talk to them. Again, this is a demon in your party. They'll say, hey, this new demon wants to join you. And then it's just random as to which demon pops up. If it's a demon that's already in your party, they just give you an item and leave. If it's a demon that's too high a level, they say, oh, you're too weak, I can't join you. And then they leave. And then if you're lucky enough to catch it where it's a demon that's not in your party, but is the proper level, hey, you get the opportunity to give away half of your MP or health or a bunch of money, or hopefully just life stones. That's the best thing to give away because they are terrible. It really does change the experience of recruiting demons. You can eventually just start running around the level and farming items and farming demons that way. And honestly, at a certain point when your level is high enough for either the floor of the axis that you're on or the dungeon that you're in, that's probably what you're going to end up doing, because once your level is at a certain ratio to your enemies, you're really not getting much experience from it. So you just pick up a little bit of gold and some items, which is good, but it's taking so long and you're fighting the same demons over and over. You're just going to start slashing, knocking them down, and just running away and trying to find the next teleport or the next room or the next floor. So maybe you get some better demons, some higher level demons to fight, which will level you up faster. So all of that leads to not the best experience with dungeons. It also unfortunately hinders the experience of recruiting demons, which has been a staple of SMT and Persona, talking with the demons and bartering. But like I said, it doesn't ruin the overall experience, it just takes it down a couple of notches. In the overworld, you'll have access to different areas which allow you to fuse demons, improve the stats of your team through the comp smith, buy accessories to increase the defense and other stats of your team, and to engage in NPCs and side quests. These areas also include Bar Hedron, which is where you go to have hangout sessions, and these allow you to increase your soul level with your teammates. It also increases with your decisions through the story, and soul level decides whether or not you can open certain gates within the axis, further your bond with your teammates, and to pick up teammate specific skills. The demon fusion is also simplified from the other games. It is entirely between 2 demons in your party, with the exception of special fusions, which require 3, maybe more demons to create the new demon. But the animations have been simplified. The number of ways that you can combine demons has been simplified, and it's certainly not as complicated as it was in the other games. With some of the changes and elements that have been removed, it does take some of the fun out of the whole demon collecting and fusing experience. That, combined with areas that can be long and bland, I did still find the game to be fun and entertaining for large portions of it, so I have to go with a 3.5 for the overall fun factor of the game. Regarding the Platinum Trophy, it will require more than one playthrough for you to Platinum the game. This is mostly because of the soul level system, which is limited to the number of soul points you can possibly get in a single playthrough. That unlocks the different levels of the soul matrix, and to unlock the 5th level of the soul matrix for every companion and complete it, you need way more soul points than you could possibly get in one playthrough. The other achievement that really prevents you from doing it in a single playthrough is that there are multiple endings to the game, and each one of the endings, there are 2, will net you a different achievement. So because of that, you will need to go into New Game Plus in order to achieve a Platinum Trophy. Now, a second playthrough on New Game Plus is benefited by being able to hold on to a lot of the progress that you made if you'd like to. So basically, you can make the second playthrough pretty inconsequential by holding on to the levels, the demons, at least in the compendium, your items, etc., mystiques, which are the add-ons that you can put on that buff the different spells and abilities of your characters. You can hang on to as many of those as you'd like for the second playthrough, which can make it really easy. Between that and skipping through a lot of the dialogue, it can make for a pretty quick second playthrough. So it's not a prohibitive platinum, but obviously if you started to get kind of burnt out by the end of the first playthrough, you might not be so inclined to go forward with the Platinum Trophy. For my final thoughts, SoulHackers 2 is a very enjoyable, more traditional JRPG. It has its own style and aesthetic, it has very likable characters and an engaging story, It is unfortunately let down in some areas due to some pacing issues and some very uninspired dungeons. All that being said, it is a good entry point for new players to the Mega 10 series and is very forgiving, so it may be particularly attractive to players who have not gotten into the series yet, and this is the first game that is available on their platform. If you are choosing between this game and the other recent Atlus titles, namely Persona 5 and Shin Megami Tensei 5, this game does not stack up that well against those. Ultimately, the biggest knock against SoulHackers 2 is that SMT5 and P5 exist. If this game was released on its own without being part of that series or using the same assets, it probably would have been received more positively, but that's not the case, and as such, SoulHackers 2 has some very large shoes to fill. While it doesn't compare favorably with either of those games, it was still fun to play through and worthwhile for a fan of the Mega 10 games. For my final recommendation, I give SoulHackers a 3.5. I would suggest picking it up either on sale if you're a Mega 10 fan, or maybe trying it out once it's available on your given streaming service, whether that's Xbox Live, PlayStation, etc. Once again, thank you all for stopping by the channel and checking out my review of SoulHackers 2. If you have enjoyed the video, or I helped you make a decision about whether or not to pull the trigger on SoulHackers, please hit that like button, subscribe for more, and check out my Twitch stream, twitch.tv/PyrusGaming, where I stream the games I'm reviewing. Please leave a comment down below with your thoughts about SoulHackers and what you liked or didn't like, or maybe something you disagreed with me about in this review. Again, these are only my opinions, and I'm just trying to give people an honest look from my perspective to help them make a decision about how to spend their gaming time. So that's going to do it for this video. This is Pyrus from Pyrus Gaming saying I hope you come back for the next one, and I will see you there.